Right. Good morning, everybody. And I used to say a very warm welcome to everybody on the webinar, but today may I just rephrase that and say a very wet welcome to this morning's webinar. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and also a huge thank you to those that are participating and making it possible for us. Thanks very, very much to Kim Robertson and to Ruan Rune to Sekele Kaninda. For those that don't know me, I'm Artemis Galatis, and I'm the General Manager of the Association, and very happy to meet some people that we have not met before. Just a little bit about the association, just very briefly. What we're just concentrating on now is getting the registrations for the course that we run with the University of the Free State. It's a six courses within, and it takes probably about 18 weeks, all online. So if anybody has any interest and they would like any more information, please don't hesitate to send me an email. And from here, I'm going to pass over everything to Kim and to Ruan and possibly to Sekele as well, and enjoy the webinar. Over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Artemis. Hi, I'm Kim Robertson. I officially work at First-Rand as a program manager. Basically, in my day job, I do I look after the entire program for the JIBAR rates reform, but I'm not here today in that capacity. I'm here today in the capacity of representative of the MPG cash market work stream. I'll go into that a little bit in terms of structure and how this program is set up from an industry point of view. But welcome to everyone. I see we've already got 67 people online, which is great. Nice to have you on this wet and windy morning. Please do excuse my hairstyle. I did try this morning, but the wind had some other ideas. Okay, great. Let's get started. It is 2 minutes past 32, so 9:32. We'll begin, and this is being recorded as well. Okay, great. Sekele will join in for any questions around the Reserve Bank. He's the lead financial market specialist from the SARB and very heavily involved in this project. Ruan Rue is also online. You will have seen him a little bit earlier. He is also from the Reserve Bank, and he heads up the DCI or the DCI work stream, which is looking at the moment at, sorry, Ruan, I just lost my train of thought there.
No worries. Data collection and market infrastructure readiness.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, he will assist with some of the questions. Great. Let's move on. I hope everyone can see my screen nicely.
You're on mute.
Goodness. Sorry about that. I was just running through the agenda. Just when everyone lets people into the call, if you can just watch that large mute button, because then you mute me as well. Okay. So background of rates reform, industry setup and timeline, some differences between JIBAR and Zeronia. We'll talk about industry progress and then practical implementation. And please, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. Artemis and Ruan will help watch those for me and direct if there are any questions. And we can also have a Q&A session at the end, because I don't think I'll be taking all the full hour. Okay. let's move on. Okay, in terms of background of rates reform, let's look internationally first. So the FSB raised concerns about the IBORs back around the GFC, so global financial crisis. In 2012, some people were jailed. Last year and the year before, some people were released from jail for colluding around the IBOR rates, because the IBOR rates were basically made up of rates that were submitted by banks for their interbank transactions, averaged and published in the market. And it was found that there was some collusion around that. In 2013, IOSCO pushed out some principles for financial benchmarks. And basically, this gave the market some guidelines on what benchmarks should look like, making them robust, credible, with integrity. Design was around underpinning transactions so that there's less likelihood of collusion, and making them efficient and appropriate for the process, in the process to produce the rates. That being said, none of the IBORs were IOSCO compliant at the time, which meant that globally, people had to look at reforming their rates around, to make them more robust, risk-free or near risk-free, and based on transactions with significant volumes. Okay, well, in South Africa, sorry, wrong button. In South Africa, the SARB set up the MPG, which stands for the Market Practitioners Group, which is a joint public and private sector body, and the main MPG is run by the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank. And that was done in 2018. At the time, they started looking at what viable rates looked like in the market. And there are papers on the SARB website having a look at what constituted those, how Zeroni was chosen out of a number of different rates, etc. And I've got some useful links towards the end of this presentation, and this presentation will be sent out so that you guys can have a look and do some research on that. But basically, they were looking for something that was consistently stable and performing so that we can pin our transactions based on that. Those particular work streams have ceased as their mandate was completed. So they looked at the rate. And now in the MPG, the current work streams that are being run are cash markets, which is what I'm part of. We also look at term reference rates, so forward-looking terms. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. ABSA run the derivatives work stream. Standard Bank run the transition coordination and planning work stream. Ruan runs the data collection and infrastructure work stream. The legal work stream is run by the SARB. The governance work stream is run by the FSCA. Accounting and tax is run by one of the accounting and tax firms in the organization. Sorry, my light just switches itself off every now and then. Please apologize for that. And the communications work stream is run by the SARB. So we have representation from industry, banks, associations, private sector, public sector on all these to actually inform the industry of how we go forward with this transition. So there is quite a lot of interest and participation in the various different work streams. Okay, I've just basically talked through this slide, but just to give you a visual of how it works, it all rolls up to the Market Practitioners Group, which I've explained, and then all the different work streams, and then all the different types of corporates, asset managers, insurers, banks, consumers, etc., who are involved in the various different workforces that are put out. pieces of work are done, and then that's published via the SARB work stream. Okay, in terms of a timeline, so we actually have come quite far. Timeline-wise, we are sitting around the Q1 mark over here. Let's talk about what has been done to date quickly, and then I'll run through what is upcoming. Okay, so the banks, there are around about 10 banks that contribute to the publication of Zeronia. Those are done for T+1. So this morning, as a bank, we submitted our transactions through to the Reserve Bank by 7 in the morning, and they then take that top and tail, the top 10 and the bottom 10% of that, and they publish that rate by 10 a.m. every morning. So it's a backward-looking overnight rate. That was so we started very live in 2022, and the rate was stuck into observation for a year, which ended in November 23. So we are looking at this here. We've also, in the interim, had a look at things like derivatives conventions, taking into account international best practice, and all the market participants involved in that, as well as cash market conventions, which were published at the beginning of last year. So those all went through a consultation process and then were published on the SARB website. I will also show you where those reside a little bit later in the presentation, if you're interested. Okay, then so the observation ended, and then Zeronia was available for use. We've been pushing liquidity in the derivatives market. So we start with the derivatives market and then push in the cash market. This year is very pivotal in terms of getting ready. So you may or may not have seen Dear CEO letters in the form of an FSCA joint statement with the National Treasury the PA, to send out to various different companies saying this is what you should be doing in terms of the transition. That is published both on the FSCA website as well as the SARB website. November 2024, there was an announcement regarding derivatives and the first initiatives, very much like what they did in the international markets. So we will be doing linear derivatives towards the end of April this year, and that'll be post an ISDA protocol published in March this year. Hopefully the CAS will be then endorsed by the Reserve Bank at that point. So the CAS has basically been sent out for consultation, the paper, and it's largely based on what the international markets have done with the credit adjustment spread. We will cover that in a little bit more detail later in the presentation, just to mention it right now in terms of timelines. Towards the end of mid-May, the bond market and the money market will be ready for creating Zeronia-based instruments, and that I'm hoping will start building liquidity in the cash market. Loans, I will cover that in a little bit as well. Suffice it to say at this point that the LMA have been quite on board with getting documentation ready, etc. And if you need line of sight of that, you can do that through your various different institutions that are members of the LMA. Okay. We are hoping that by the end of the year that the SARB will announce the formal announcement of the cessation date. That will then crystallize the credit adjustment spread. And I'll discuss that a little bit later. And then ISDA can build that in and publish their protocols at that point. Okay. We are going to look at active transition from sort of mid this year, if the teams are ready. And then we look at March 2026, no new JIBAR. which just is a milestone that allows us, much like the international market, a period of time to actually bed down new transactions and then look forward into how do we transition our back book prior to cessation date. We have penciled, the SARB have penciled in December 2026 as cessation. So we need to, at that point, have potential legislation in place, as well as looking at, items that might be required for active transition or passive transition, being language in your various different agreements. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more detail around JIBAR versus Zeronia. So what are we looking at? JIBAR is a forward-looking term rate, and you've got various different tenors, whereas Zeronia is an alternative reference rate, or also known as a near risk-free rate that is overnight and backward-looking. So today, last night's rate gets published by the Reserve Bank on their website. There's also a link to that, should you be interested, towards the end of the presentation. Okay, JIBAR, so loans are pretty easy, where you know your interest rate at the beginning of the interest period, and you know what you're in for from a cash flow point of view at the end of the period. So if you are looking at a 3-month, you've got 90 days over a rate that you know at the beginning of the period. Whereas Zeronia is an overnight backward-looking rate that changes daily. So you, at the end of the interest period, you will have a compounded rate over that period that needs to be calculated. Calculation is quite onerous, but we've got ways and means of getting around that, and I'll go through that in a bit of time as well. JIBAR inherently includes a bank credit risk, as well as a premium for longer dated funds, or liquidity premium as it's known. So you will notice with JIBAR, and you can see on one of my graphs in a little bit, how JIBAR actually predicts or starts moving around hikes and cuts. Zeronia has little to no credit premium and no liquidity premium for term built in. Okay, so as a result of that, this slide largely looks at loans, but I'll go through and bonds, but I'll go through the differences between the different products in a bit. So the conventions follow the international conventions, which is a 5 business day look back. And that means on one day, you would look back 5 business days. I've used a 2023 example here over a public holiday period. So you can see the Monday, the 25th of September, was a public holiday. As a result, the Monday, the 2nd of October, would look back to Friday, the 22nd of September. If there are no public holidays in the period, it will just look back to the same day in the preceding week. So pretty easy there to apply those conventions. It doesn't mean to say that you cannot have a longer look back. That is not precluded. However, the recommendation is to use a 5-day look back in the bonds and the loans market. Money market is one, but I'll show you the conventions in a bit. Okay, I mentioned that Zeronia was an overnight backward-looking rate based on unsecured overnight call deposits placed with commercial banks. There are around about 10 banks that contribute to that. It's topped and tailed 10%, and then averaged and published to the website by the Reserve Bank. There is a lot more information in the paper that I have cited here at the bottom of this slide. And that goes into how these things behave, how it was chosen, etc. I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the presentation. But this is just to give you an idea of how Zeronia is actually represented. Okay, the SARB very kindly published rates going backwards to 2016, and then forward from the from 2022, August it was. And here I have plotted this on a graph. It is a little bit small, apologies for that. The Zeronia is in the gray line, so the bottom one. Repo is on in the blue line, represented by the blue line, the light blue line, and the dark blue line is 3-month JIBAR. It is not really comparable as a result of the construct. However, it does give you an idea of how these things track relative to each other over the period. The dips over here you're seeing in the middle of the graph is the COVID period. But you can see nicely how Zeronia tracks along a rate hike cycle as well as a rate cut cycle. Okay. And then also I mentioned that JIBAR moved up as we hit rate hikes and cuts and down. So you can just see how that behavior tracks relative. All this information was obtained publicly. So this was done up until a couple of days ago. We do within the group here track this on a daily basis just to make sure. Okay, in terms of industry progress, I mentioned earlier the market conventions. So I've just popped them all on the slide over here. So I think you guys will mainly be interested in the cash market, which are the last 3 over here. Bonds and loan market have a 5 business day look back. It's daily compounded rate without an observation shift, as we felt we needed to give the market a direction to go in as an industry producing this paper that was published by the Reserve Bank. And then the conventions largely follow the balance of the conventions in the market that everyone is used to. We just noted them here. Okay. There are slight mismatches if you're trying to hedge your position, and that's with regard to the look back in derivatives market, which is 0 business days. And if you're looking at either any one of these 3, be it your loan market, your money market, or your bond market, there is a slight mismatch. It only really makes a material difference if your interest period falls over or your payment period falls over a interest rate hike or cut. Otherwise, it doesn't really make much of a difference. Okay. The SARB have published working papers and examples. So each of the markets you saw above in this slide have published papers, detailed paper containing history and design principles, international convention comparisons, etc., as well as the chosen convention and rationale behind it. It's quite technical in most cases, but fairly explanatory. Also in that pack is a practical guide. So how do I calculate the interest for those particular coupons or interest payments on loans, and then as well as a spreadsheet containing an example of a loan, or in the case of a bond, a model looking at that. And then if you have intra-period principal reductions, it also covers those things. There is another tool in the market that I'll discuss a little bit later that gives you a little bit of a cheat to having that. I've also included the link to those publications down the bottom of the page for you guys. Okay, in terms of the practical guide, it gives you a step-by-step practical way of calculating these things. If these formulae scare you, there is a spreadsheet that does the same thing as well. Just a quick view of the spreadsheet, and if you do look a lot at your loan documentation, you'll recognize the formulae from within your loan documentation, and I will discuss that in a minute as well. So this gives you this is on the SARB website. this gives you a very, very granular view of how the calculation is done, and nothing is hidden within the calculation spreadsheet as well. So you just plug in your days, plug in the rates, and off you go. Okay, from a practical implementation point of view, let's discuss the credit adjustment spread. So JIBAR is technically different to Zeronia in that JIBAR is a term rate and a forward-looking term rate. So today I will get a rate that is applicable for argument's sake, 3 months, whereas Zeronia is based on overnight transactions and published the following day. So it's a backward-looking overnight rate. So what does that mean practically for us as Treasury people? That means that built into JIBAR, and you can see with the diagram over here, that I have bank credit and liquidity, which I mentioned earlier, and a term premium built into that rate. That ultimately translates into Zeronia plus a credit adjustment spread. So the credit adjustment spread is just the representation of the bank credit as well as the term premium that is applied to JIBAR. So when we are transitioning from JIBAR to Zeronia, as is required of us over the next couple of years, we will need to, in order to keep everyone in more or less the same economic position, we will need to replace JIBAR with Zeronia plus the credit adjustment spread to keep economic equivalence on the various different deals that we're having a look at. Your margin typically won't change on a deal like that. So if you're doing a straight transition, you'll replace JIBAR with Zeronia plus the credit adjustment spread, and then your margin will sit on top of that. New contracts would not typically attract a credit adjustment spread because they will be priced for the differential between that, or it will be a market-driven price. Okay. Right, I will go through this calculator in a bit. RMB have put up a calculator to do all of the above that I've just discussed on the fly. And once we are done with the presentation, I'll take you guys through the calculator and how to navigate it, how to calculate anything you need, as well as any of the bits and bobs available on the site. Okay. I've put in some links over here to the Market Practitioners Group website that'll give you an indication of some of the information that I've shared in this presentation, as well as the MPG Publications website. That's where you'll find all the publications, as well as some interviews, legal interviews. On the MPG conference website, you'll find some links to some of the items that were discussed at the 2023 and 2024 MPG conferences, as well as videos and the presentation, and some other webinars, etc. And then Zeronia publication of the interest rate in the is the bottom one that I've referred to here. Okay, let us go through the calculator quickly. Please bear with me a minute while I get it up. So as I mentioned, it is sitting on the RMB website, on the finance page. There is a link on the page that I showed you. So basically, it just gives you an idea of how to use it. On the left-hand side, inputs, on the right-hand side, results, and you've got a couple of options here. So I'm just going to put some dates in. I've used this extensively, so let me not use the saved info. It does come up with a date picker, if you can see over here. So if I need to say have interest from December, let's go back 3 months-ish. So 2nd of December through to, if I cancel that out, I come up with the 2nd of December, let's say through to the 3rd of February. Okay, benchmark is Zeronia. This would be your typical margin, and you would add in your credit adjustment spread, your applicable credit adjustment spread, if you were looking at that. Let's say, for argument's sake, it's 200 basis points. It's quoted in basis points on this. The look back days is a drop down. You can go all the way up to, we've catered for all the way up to 20 business days look back if you've got some some regulatory reason why you can't settle within 5 days. And then we've marked the convention recommendations from the Reserve Bank on here. So I'm going to use the loans and bonds one because that's basically what we're discussing at the moment. And then you can put in your principal amount as, let's look at 10 million. Oh, 10 million over here. Okay, and then if you hit the calculate button, it takes a couple of seconds and it comes up with the number of days that you are, I'm just going to move you guys over to the other side. Number of days that you're looking at results for. So in this case, it's 63 days. The effective Zeronia rate, the effective margin, and the calculation of that compounded, backward looking, and then total margin as well as the total amount payable. If you are not entirely comfortable with that, you can download the Excel, and that downloads the Excel on the fly that you can then go and have a look at. This is based on the Excel that the SARB have pushed out. Okay, let me just kill my auto recovery here. My laptop froze yesterday. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. Okay, so this then takes those 60 days, does the calculations, and for each of the days, none of the formulae within the spreadsheet is hidden. So you can see everything that goes on. It goes through the days accrued. So over the weekend, you will see a 3 or a 4 if it's over a longer period with a public holiday. The applicable rate, the date it uses the applicable rate from, so it would have been a 5-day look back. All your selections are up here, so you can see exactly what's going on. And then your calculations are along the side over here. The nice thing with the spreadsheet is that you can actually do principal reductions within the spreadsheet once you've downloaded it. So if you do have an intra-period principal reduction, you can affect it on the spreadsheet and see the results down the bottom of the spreadsheet. It does all the correct rounding according to the conventions, the spreadsheet that's been done on the SARB website has an additional piece on it that looks at syndicated loans. It hasn't been built into the calculator due to a little bit of complexity on that side. But this should be fairly handy for calculating all your interest payments on the fly, should you need to. It's not aimed at being a forward-looking calculator, so it doesn't have a curve built into it to facilitate forward-looking rates. It only deals with backward-looking. So if your interest is due in 5 days, you can actually calculate it now on the fly. Right, I've given you guys a lot of information. So the one thing that I didn't have in the presentation is the discussion around term rates. So let me spend a little bit of time on the term rates, and we can have a discussion. I'm going to pop down the presentation and the sharing so I can see if there are any items in the chat or we need to deal with any questions on the webinar. Okay, so in terms of term rates, let me just have a look while I am good. I'm off of mute. Okay, so in terms of term rates, so term rates are a little bit complicated in that in order to be IOSCO compliant, they need to be calculated in a robust manner. Okay, so the teams are busy looking at that at the moment within the cash market work stream. We've got a team that has put together a term rate paper that has not been published as yet. And the reason for that is we looked at what was required to have a term rate. So a term rate requires a robust derivatives market that the rate can be based off of. And it also requires trade repositories. Now, based on the fact that Zeroni is a fairly new rate in the market and liquidity has not built in the derivatives market as yet, there's a little bit of a wait and see approach to this, to wait for liquidity in the market so that we can see how these things pan out, and that we can test the actual methodology chosen, which has not been chosen yet as well, to see how that gets calculated in the market. The direction, and Ruan can attest to this from a Reserve Bank point of view, is that apologies, I saw the recording just stopped. Artemis, are we good? Okay, let me carry on. So the term rates require a robust derivatives market, which we don't have as yet. And it also requires trade repositories, which Straight has just been given the license for, to create an OTC trade repository. So that work is in progress. Once we've got both of those things, it's a case of looking at, very much like they did in the international markets, do we have enough transactions to base a term rate off of? Is it robust? Does it withstand the scrutiny around IOSCO compliance, etc.? So the Reserve Bank have indicated, and I think if Sekele is on the line, he can probably talk to this, that teams should not wait for the term rate, that they should look at the compounded rate, and the term rate will come on later in if we are able to get a term rate through, it'll be much later in the whole process. So that is the work that's on the go at the moment. I think that is just about everything I had to discuss. I'm going to open the floor for questions. Let's have a look at if there's anything on the Q&A. Okay, let's talk quickly about Shakira Pele's question around compounded RFR and the credit adjustment spread to the loans. Okay, so from a timeline point of view, should I put the time? No, let me concentrate on the question. From a timeline point of view, the SARB towards the end of this year will announce the formal announcement of the cessation date, which is likely to be the end of 2026. So that would be your absolute last day to put your compounded RFR in. And the credit adjustment spread is busy being, it's a post-consultation, is busy being endorsed at the moment, or will be endorsed by the Reserve Bank. The methodology at that point, Bloomberg, very much like in the international markets, will start publishing that credit adjustment spread on a daily basis. When we get to a point where the SARB actually formally announced the cessation of JIBAR, that will then trigger off a solidification of the credit adjustment spread. So it'll be set, and published, much like it was in the international market. They published those rates on the 5th of March 2021 for a cessation at the end of that year for most of the tenors. And then they had an additional 18 months for some of the tenors of the US dollar LIBOR, and then also synthetic rates. But basically, that methodology, the ISDA methodology, looks at the 5-year historic median of the difference between JIBAR and Zeronia. So it does give a fairly fair approximation of what it will be towards the cessation date. If you have loans before the transition and they roll off before the transition, there's no need to remediate them unless they are what you guys refer to as evergreens, or they roll and on an annual basis. You'll need to look at your agreements and get some robust fallback language in. Chat to your loan providers. They have access to the Loan Markets Association, and the Loan Markets Association has kindly put out exposure draft language that is being used in some of the contracts to date around formal cessation and trigger events and transition without having to revisit that loan agreement. Okay, so that's Shakira's question out the way. I hope I answered it adequately, Shakira. Which variables are looked into to determine the credit adjustment spread? Okay, so Mbukazi, Patrick, your name's backwards. So to answer your question there, there was an extensive process to look at the various different options on credit adjustment spread, but ultimately what was decided and consulted on earlier this year and towards the end of last year is the ISDA protocol, which looks at, as I mentioned, a 5-year historic median approach. And that's generally accepted in the international markets as best practice. We did not, as an industry, and the Reserve Bank did not deviate from that methodology, because it would have, there are a number of reasons, and it went out for consultation. I can provide a link to the paper. It is available on the SARB website. But basically, we would have had to find different providers other than Bloomberg, and ISDA would have been a little bit more complicated as well. But it does stand up to scrutiny, the methodology, and has been tried and tested in the international market. I hope that covers the question. It took, Trevor, it took quite some time to introduce the term SOFR rate. So it was done prior to cessation, a few months actually. But remember, there was an extended period that SOFR was available. So SOFR was already available in the market at the time that they actually introduced the project. So we're in a slightly unique situation in South Africa in that Zeronia is new. So there's been no base liquidity build prior to the rate being endorsed by the Reserve Bank, and that makes it a little bit tricky. So we've got a slightly longer tail on actually getting a term rate, whereas the SOFR guys already had some time and some data to work with when they started looking at it. And that was done probably about 5-6 months prior to the 2021 cessation. So I think they ended the 1 week and 1 month tenors at the end of December 2021. And then that rolled the further 18 months to the 30th of June. And then there was also synthetic allowed in that market for certain tenors. Okay, let me see what other questions we've got here. What is the timing on whether term rate will be introduced or not? This will have a correct. So Asha, whether the term rate will be introduced or not. So the investigations are underway at the moment. We should have more clarity in H2 this year around whether it is possible or not possible, and some publications from the cash market via the SARB on how this will look. I hope that answers the question. It's a little bit of a wait and see on that as a result of the fact that we still need to build liquidity in the derivatives market. Okay, how are Maurice, how are banks considering the transition of both debt and derivatives as timing of hedges? Yes, so if we have a chat to the derivatives work stream, much like the international environment, the plan is to have derivatives available for the different matching tenors. So if you've got a 5-day look back on a loan that you need to hedge, then there should be an applicable 5-day derivatives with a 5-day look back to match. So you will have noticed from that diagram that I did that the look back days don't match up. On that, I had a nice big red cross there. But absolutely, the derivatives crew have undertaken to ensuring that we actually do have a market around that for hedging purposes. I hope that covers the question. Ruan, have I left anything out?
No, I don't think so. Unless anyone is interested to see how we are doing the liquidity build in the derivatives market and what our plans are around that. So maybe I can give a brief update on that. So basically for linear derivatives, the DCI has been focusing on getting all the market infrastructures ready for derivatives, where the biggest milestone is LCH clearing ability from September last year. And subsequent to that, we've seen some uptake of derivatives in the market, and we'll continue to monitor that. So we are looking, we'll keep on pushing so that we can get the proper liquidity built in the market. And we do hope and see that it will pick up pretty much around April, May. And we'll keep on chasing more of the international market makers that's been taking a bit of a wait and see game on the derivatives market in South Africa. But from an infrastructure point of view, most are ready. It's really just understanding how we can accelerate the uptake.
Thanks, Ruan. I see we do have another question on from Patrick. And that is, given the term rate is not yet available, will JIBAR be used going forward on new long-term loans and RCFs, or different rate will be used? So, Patrick, we are hoping that the long-term loans will at least, if they go into JIBAR immediately, will have robust fallback language around, remediation into Zeronia. But we are not stopping anyone from entering into JIBAR loans and long-term loans going forward. But there will be a point where, very much like the US market, where we will get to no new JIBAR in March 2026, and then cessation of JIBAR, which means JIBAR will no longer be published towards the end of 2026. And the formal announcement of that will happen at the end of this year. So institutions will need to look and see, and it's entirely up to the institution on what is important to you, whether you renegotiate your loan with the institution that you've got the loan from, or whether you actually go into the overnight backward-looking compounded with a 5-day lag, or more lag if you need it in your institution, to actually transition that over prior to the cessation of JIBAR. I hope that answers the question. I'm very happy for people to voice over if they're not comfortable. I got a thumbs up. Okay. I don't see any more questions. I hope I covered that adequately for everybody. We are planning more engagements with industry. I think Artemis can come in here and let us know. Oh, I do see another question. Does Zeronia introduce new risks in the market? No. So it actually makes the market a bit more robust. And the reason for that is so it's a bit of a challenging question. So it does make the market more efficient, and it does mean that from a risk perspective, you should be in a better position as an organization around risk mitigation and cessations of the rates going forward, as well as the fact that you know that this is underpinned by actual transactions. So I think Zakele would be way better at answering this than me. So let me hand over to him. I see he's online.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
You are.
Yeah. So Kim, I think you are spot on. I think the introduction of Zeronia, it makes the financial system more resilient. The benchmark is more robust compared to JIBAR, and it eliminates some of the risks that were inherent in the design of JIBAR, including manipulation and things that could dislocate as a result of either a loss of confidence or the fundamentals changing. Now, this is not to say that the introduction of Zeronia itself does not bring any other risks. The risk is mainly around transition risk and legal risk. So by that I mean, if you delay your preparedness to use Zeronia in your organization, whether for valuation purposes or hedging, as Kim was suggesting, and other things, you do run a risk that when JIBAR does that get discontinued, you are unable to operate as you did in the JIBAR dispensation. The whole idea with this 2-year run now is to manage that risk such that by the time we discontinue the publication of JIBAR, all organizations have actually transitioned. And where it is impracticable to transition, we offer legislation that then facilitates the transition of those contracts. But it is then very important to take stock of the contracts that you do have, negotiate the ones that there is room for negotiation, agree on the terms of the credit adjustment spreads, and all of that. Why? Because the major risk that we're trying to also manage with these credit adjustment spreads is to minimize the risk of economic transfer. It's not an exact science. It will produce some winners, some losers, but the objective ought to be to minimize that as much as possible. So if you like what we've produced, and I'm sure Kim did cover it, and it is on the sub website, you are welcome to adopt the methodology, and Bloomberg should be publishing the numbers quite soon. But otherwise, you are also free to get into negotiation with your counterparty and decide on what to be a fair credit adjustment spread. So once obviously we've transitioned, we will be in a better place as a market because we'll then have a much more robust benchmark. However, you should be aware that the transition itself does bring a lot of risks that you should be managing actively, and get in and have a program within your organization as soon as possible. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Kelly, for taking that from me. You articulated that so much better than I do. Okay, and then we've got a question from Peter over here. Is Zoronia based on pure overnight transactions, or does South Africa still have the restriction that interest cannot be compounded more frequently than monthly? So this is a daily compounded overnight rate, and it is based on actual transactions in the market. So I think I did pop a slide on there to show exactly how it's calculated, as well as cite the paper on the SARB website that deals with how it was chosen, how it's made up, etc. I hope that covers that question. So Kelly, anything to add there?
No, ma'am. You're quite correct. It is a daily compounded. It would be a daily compounded rate when you use it.
I hope that covers everything. I see we're almost out of time. Artemis, can I hand back over to you?
Yes, you can. Thank you very much, Kim. And really, that was my most, I didn't understand very much, but it was really seemed to be most useful and most comprehensive, very comprehensive, and everybody will be very appreciative of that. Thank you for all that you did and all the time that you put into it. So Kelly, thank you too as well for coming in, and for Ruan as well also. If there are any further questions, and perhaps we could try and schedule when you think it's necessary between Zakele and yourself and Ruan, and we can have a follow-up session later on in the year.
Very happy to do that. Artemis, I'll also pop you the presentation so that you can share it with the audience.
Thank you very much. And the recording will be available. I'll just double check it. There may be just a little bit of editing. Otherwise, that will also be available to everybody.